You talked about foreign investors coming in to the agriculture sector to invest, the risk takers, like you described them. But what level of domestic involvement do we have, domestic investment do we have in the agriculture exporting business?
Well, the local investors, I believe that
are we seeing Nigerian investors, their place, having to take position and take advantage of the potentials in that sector? Are we doing that?
Like I mentioned earlier, the supply chain. The supply chain has to be Nigerian farmers, first of all. Then you talk about Nigerian investors who will come in and set up, facilities or set up what we call the zones where they are going to, gather their commodities for exports. The question now is, the former CBN governor came about the NISA issue about risk sharing, de-risking the agricultural sector. Banks are averse, Nigerian banks are averse towards agricultural lending. Most of them have agricultural decks. There are no agricultural desk officers, majority of them. So they don't even understand what is happening in the sector. So the question is, within us here locally, we have to be serious. Serious in terms of Nigerian investors, the Nigerian investors, Nigerian government, and even the Nigerian people. Because if an investor, a local investor, a Nigerian investor comes there, puts in money, what is the guarantee he's going to get his stock, his commodity, the supply chain? Like what's happening in Kano now, Kadawa Valley is a hub for tomato. A Nigerian has set up a big factory there, close to 25 million USD, $25 million. So the question now is, he set up that facility now. So what happens in terms of feedstock is he's absorbing from the locals because, like what the irony we have here, during the season, when we're doing the harvest season, there's excess of crop. Then during when the planting season comes, there is no crop. So he absorbs those excesses and then uses and processes in the factory and then turns into paste, into tomato paste for sale. So such Nigerians are going to come, such players will come on board if there's some level of seriousness on the side of government to protect their investments and the enabling laws too. So that by the time he sets up the factory, there won't be a counter importation of tomato pastries. You understand? That would just sabotage the whole investment is made there. Maybe they're now reducing import duty or putting an import waiver on tomato importation. Then how do you expect him to produce at the factory there?
Okay, I just want to ask you, because when we talk about agriculture value chain, we can link it to agriculture financing. We mentioned the issue of grant earlier on, but to what extent is the government, getting involved in this in terms of funding those, value chain processes, those farmers who are into this agricultural export?
Well, government is doing a lot in terms of releasing funds to BOI, the Bank of Industry, Bank of Agric, and then the NISA template they brought about, the risking agricultural lending, But the question now comes in is that why have Nigerians tapped into these opportunities? You hear several billions of naira being released for the agriculture sector. Why hasn't Nigerians tapped into it? The question is, number one, information dissemination is very poor. Then number two, you talk about the farmers' organizations here are not properly oriented. There is no proper training. There's no capacity building for them. These are support systems that the ministry should have as they are also doing all this, Now, the question you asked about the financing, government is doing quite a lot, And if government is doing quite a lot in terms of funding, we talk about the framework. The framework and the policies has to be enacted as laws, where investors, because government won't be the one doing all the investments, where private people can also come in and invest. There has to be some protection for the investors, because a situation where you open the borders, and then allow people to import, then the factory, the effect of the factory or whatever investments you are putting in place is defeated. So these are some of the challenges, policy somersault and the rest of them.
I want us to look at a very important part of the agriculture export business, which has to do with the markets of our products. Where do we focus on?
You mean in terms of the products?
Yes,
Agriculture
where do we
products?
take them to? Which market? There's a West African zone, or we're going to the whole of Africa, or even to the West itself?
Well, locally here, there's a large market. Then export, there's also a large market. Let me take a product like cassava. You know, there's been a lot of emphasis on cassava right now. Like, if you take that for an example, if a law is enacted to include high-quality cassava flour in the production of bread, for instance, then in fact every bread you see, there will be 20% of cassava flour in it. With that, the cassava growers have a market. The processors have a market. Because the bakers also have a market, because the population, the populace, we have a huge population here, we also absorb and buy the bread, you know. Now, that's on the local side. Then for the export side, there is a lot of emphasis on biofuel, that's, you know, organic fuel in Europe, biofuel in Europe, you know. And cassava, dry cassava chips, there's a large demand for it. So the question now is, what happens? So these are two chains. Now, if an investor comes in, for instance, and sets up a processing factory to produce high-quality cassava flour, what happens if it's not passed as a law for this cassava flour to be used in every bread you see on the streets?
Seems you're proposing for cassava to be added in our bread.
Of course.
Yourself, okay.
Of course, it is. It is healthier. It's healthy. Scientifically, it's been proven it's healthier, is far better or healthier than even what we are having right now. You understand, in terms of quality. And also, it's going to put out about $825 million in the hands of Nigerians across the cassava growers and the processors. You know, that's on the local market. Then on the bigger scale, on the international globe, there's a demand for biofuel in Europe. So the cassava chips can even be processed and exported there. You understand? So there are two chains that we could use, taking cassava as a product. There are two chains that we could use. So the issue now is that government has still a big role to play in this whole issue.
All right, let's look at tariffs, because I know that to whatever extent, even if the government is trying to slash the amounts that you pay while you're exporting, what is the state, what is the level of tariff that the agricultural exporters are paying at this point?
Well, let's take it two sides. Because when you're talking about GDP, you're talking about the net balance between exports and imports, you know. Then, like the business said that agriculture had dropped. The services industry had increased. And, you know, agriculture is a real sector. This other service industry, you know. So the question is, what happens? The tariffs in terms of importation, like the big players in the palm oil industry have been able to press for some form of 0% import tariffs on import duty on heavy agricultural equipment. You understand? Now, that's on the importation side. For the export side, now our products, the country, depending on the country you're exporting to, if you're exporting to like a country like America, United States of America, the standards are a lot higher. They put higher criteria and higher, you know, higher criteria for exporting to those countries. While some other countries don't, they accept what's produced here. They just give you their standards, and the Nigerian Quarantine Services works with it and all that, and there's a liaison relationship. Now, there's also the export expanded EEG, the export expanded grants, which comes in as a result of exporting. That's assuming you're exporting a container load of commodities, agri-commodities, worth $100,000. You get 10% of it as incentive from government for exporting.
Is it still going on?
Yeah, it's still going on.
Because there have been complaints about the fact that the EEG is not going to Nigerian manufacturers. There's been issues about the EEG just a few years ago, and the complaint has been that the federal government, it's actually an allegation that the federal government prefers to give this grants to foreigners who are manufacturing here in the country. What is the state of the EEG right now?
The EEG is still very functional.
To Nigerians who are manufacturing.
The Nigerian government doesn't discriminate against Nigerian exporters. You understand? Nigerian government doesn't discriminate against Nigerian exporters. Even if you're air freighting or you're moving by ship, you're sending your commodities in container load by vessels. Now there are no discriminations. the grants are there. You have to go through the processes. Go to your bank, get the NXP forms, and all those processes. Now, there is some level of thoroughness you have to put in place before you can claim your funds. And in other way, what a lot of companies do is that if they can't claim the funds, what they do is they also use it to pay their tax. Because assuming you have an export of $100,000, you get 10% from government, then at the end of the year, you could use that $10,000 as the proof of the forms you get and the receipts and everything to put in for your tax payment. Do you understand? So Nigerians saying that they haven't benefited, I don't think that's true. Because there's a lot of processes in it, and you have to go through all those processes. CBN is involved, your local bank involved, customs is involved, your freighting agent is involved. There are a lot of chains involved. So everything has to correspond. Because when you go to your bank, they give you 6 forms. So all those angles have to correspond before you can make claims. So there's a bit of thoroughness. But I think these people who are coming in from the foreigners who come in, they are large players because in their countries they get some funding to invest here on most of the projects they are doing here. So they have the patience to go through all these processes and then make the claims from the federal government.
Okay, I know that there's still a lot more to talk about, but I just wanted to touch on a few issues here. You talked about getting grants, foreigners getting grants from their own country and bringing them here. And there have been news that they get these grants at a very low interest rate from their own country and invest them here in Nigeria and even other parts of Africa. But what level of interest rate have we been able to give our own people who either want to invest here or even outside of the country in the agricultural business?
Well, here, why would a Nigerian want to invest outside Nigeria in terms of arable land? We have over 81 million hectares of arable land. That's one. The whole Africa has about over 500 million hectares of land, arable land. If you were following the last World Economic Forum, they were saying that Africa has an advantage of arable land, 60% of the arable land in the world, and Nigeria has a chunk. So why would you want to go? And that's first. Then the second bit is you now look at the issue of financing. The banks here are willing, the BOI especially, is willing to release funds, Bank of Industry and Bank of Agriculture.
At the low interest rate?
At the low interest rate. They do between 10 to 12, thereabouts.
Okay.
You understand? But the commercial banks are doing a lot higher.
Okay.
You understand?
All right. I just wanted to hold the thought for it because
No
I know that there's still some issues we will discuss before we let you go on the show. We've been talking to Tochi Aduku. He is an agri-business consultant, and we've been looking at the improvements that can be done in agriculture export in terms of the economic possibilities, diversification of our own economy to make it better. So we'll go on a break and we'll be right back.